My wife announced she was leaving me for her boss, draining our joint account for their future. "You're a pathetic, worthless loser. He's everything you'll never be, rich, powerful, and a real man," she sneered, wrapping the gifts I had bought her. I let her go. 6 days later, a neighbor called to say someone was pounding on my door, desperately screaming for help. As the door slammed shut, the sound echoed through the empty house, a stark reminder of the life I had just lost. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing through 1,000 thoughts, each one more painful than the last. The room felt colder, the shadows longer, as if the very essence of our home was mourning with me. I could feel the weight of her words, each one a dagger to my heart. Pathetic, worthless loser. The phrases replayed in my mind, a cruel mantra. I looked around, at the remnants of our life together, the photos on the walls, the couch where we used to cuddle, the kitchen where we cooked meals together. Now, it all seemed like a distant memory, a life that belonged to someone else. My gaze fell upon the gifts I had so lovingly chosen for our anniversary. They lay there, wrapped in the same paper I had picked out with such care, now a mockery of my efforts. I picked one up, the weight of it in my hands, feeling the irony of the situation. Here I was, holding on to gifts for a love that had just walked out the door. A part of me wanted to chase after her, to demand an explanation, to confront Richard, to reclaim what was rightfully mine. But another part, the part that was still, reeling from the shock, whispered that it was over. There was no going back from what she had said, from the finality in her voice. I moved to the window, watching as Emily loaded her car with her belongings. She didn't look back, not once. The streetlights flickered on, casting an eerie glow on the scene. My heart ached with a mix of betrayal and confusion. How could she leave so easily? How could she discard our years together for someone else? Knew I had to do something, but what? Confrontation seemed pointless now. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. The thought of facing Richard, of seeing the smug satisfaction in his eyes, was unbearable. No, I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I turned away from the window, back to the life I had to rebuild. I needed to think, to plan. The first step was to secure what was left of our finances. Emily had taken what she deemed necessary, but I needed to ensure there was something left for me. With a heavy heart, I walked over to my desk, the one place in the house that still felt like mine. I opened my laptop, the screen's light harsh against the dim room. I logged into our joint bank account, my fingers trembling slightly as I navigated through the transactions. There it was, the withdrawal she had mentioned. A significant sum, enough to start a new life with someone else. The sight of it made my stomach churn. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark, mirroring the darkness I felt inside. I sat back, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I had to decide. Would I let this break me, or would I find the strength to move forward? The days that followed were a blur, each one bleeding into the next as if time itself had lost its meaning. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with my solitary footsteps. Every corner held a memory, each one a reminder of what I had lost. I wandered through the rooms, my fingers brushing against the cold surfaces of our shared life. The kitchen where we cooked, the living room where we watched movies, our bedroom where we shared everything. Each touch was like a spark, igniting the pain anew. My work, once a refuge, became a battleground of distraction. Clients called, their voices distant and tinny through the phone, asking for updates, for progress. But my focus was shattered, my mind a fog of confusion and sorrow. I tried to reach out to friends, hoping for some solace, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain this? How could I admit that Emily had left me for another man, that I was now alone in this too large house, grappling with the remnants of our life together? On the third day, the phone rang, jarring me from my stupor. It was the bank, informing me of a significant withdrawal from our joint account. The financial hit was substantial, but it was the emotional bankruptcy that weighed heavier on me. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear long after the call ended, staring into space. The money was gone, just like her, and with it, any illusion of control I might have had. I decided to let go, not out of acceptance, but from a sheer lack of energy to fight. What was the point? She had made her choice, and I was left with the pieces. I spent my days in a haze, barely eating, the fridge a testament to my neglect. The food spoiled, just like my life, untouched and forgotten. Then, on the 6th day, the phone rang again. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of hope and dread swirling within me. Who could be calling now? What could they possibly want from me in this state of ruin? I picked up the phone, my voice hoarse from disuse. Hello? I managed, bracing myself for whatever news awaited me on the other end of the line. The voice on the other end was Mrs. Henderson, her tone urgent. Mark, there's someone at your door, pounding and screaming for help. I think it's Emily. My heart skipped a beat. Emily? Here? After everything? I rushed to the door, my mind racing with possibilities. Opening the door, I found Emily, her face bruised, her clothes torn, desperation etched into every line of her body. Mark, please, you have to help me. Richard, he's not who I thought. He's dangerous. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Despite the betrayal, I couldn't turn her away. I brought her inside, my mind reeling from the shock. As Emily recounted her ordeal, it became clear that Richard was not just a powerful man, but a controlling, abusive one. He had isolated her, manipulated her, and when she tried to leave, he showed his true colors. The gifts I had seen her wrapping were not for our future, but a desperate attempt to appease Richard's growing anger. He wouldn't let me leave, Mark. He hit me, and when I tried to escape, he chased me down. I barely got away. Emily's voice was a whisper, each word heavy with fear and pain. I looked at her, seeing the woman I once loved, now a shadow of her former self. The bruises on her face were stark against her pale skin, a testament to the violence she had endured. My heart ached, not just for her, but for the life we had lost, for the love that had turned into this nightmare. I need to call the police, I said, my voice firm despite the turmoil inside me. Emily grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with panic. No, please, not yet. He has connections, Mark. He'll know, and he'll come after me. I need somewhere safe to stay just for tonight. Please. The weight of her plea hung in the air. I knew the risks, the potential danger of harboring her here, but the thought of sending her back into that hell was unbearable. Okay, you can stay here. But we need to figure out a plan. You can't run forever, Emily. She nodded, her body trembling, as she tried to compose herself. I helped her to the couch where she sank down, her energy spent. I fetched a blanket, wrapping it around her, trying to offer some semblance of comfort. As I sat beside her, the silence between us was thick with unspoken words. I wanted to ask about Richard, about how she could have been so deceived, but now wasn't the time. Instead, I focused on what I could do now. I'll secure the house, I said, standing up. We'll make sure you're safe tonight. I checked the locks, the windows, ensuring no one could easily get in. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing was clear. I had to protect her, despite everything. Returning to the living room, I found Emily staring blankly at the floor, her hands clutching the blanket tightly. We'll figure this out, Emily. I promise, I said, more to reassure myself than her. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, filled with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Thank you, Mark. I'm so sorry for everything. I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. The night stretched ahead, filled with the need for vigilance and the heavy burden of decisions yet to be made. Would I seek revenge on Richard for what he did, or would I focus solely on protecting Emily? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. I couldn't let her face this alone. The shock of seeing Emily like this, battered and broken, was like a punch to my gut. My initial anger towards her betrayal turned into a fierce resolve to protect her. I knew I had to act, but the police were the first step. I dialed 911, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I need to report an assault, I said, My eyes locked on Emily's bruised face. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the urgency. "Sir, can you provide more details?" "Emily, my ex-wife, has been assaulted by her new partner, Richard. She's here at my house seeking refuge. We need help. They advised me to come to the station for a formal report, but I insisted on an officer coming to us." Emily's fear was palpable, and I couldn't risk moving her. After a tense wait, 2 officers arrived, their faces set in lines of concern as they took in Emily's condition. Emily gave her statement, her voice trembling but determined. She recounted the abuse, the isolation, the threats. The officers listened, their expressions growing darker with each word. They warned us that dealing with someone like Richard with his connections would be complex, but they promised to do what they could. As they left, I knew police involvement wasn't enough. I needed more. I reached out to an old friend, a private investigator named Tom, who had helped me with a case years ago. "Tom, I need your help. It's urgent," I said, my voice low, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Tom agreed to look into Richard, to dig up anything that could help our case. Meanwhile, Emily and I packed a few essentials. The house felt too exposed, too vulnerable. We checked into a hotel, a nondescript place on the outskirts of town. Every sound made us jump, every shadow seemed to move. Emily's fear was infectious, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting Richard to burst through the door at any moment. The hotel room was small, the walls thin, but it was a sanctuary compared to the uncertainty outside. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm sorry, Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was so wrong about him." I sat beside her, the space between us filled with the ghosts of our past. "It's not your fault, Emily. He manipulated you, but we're going to get through this." The night was long, filled with the tension of waiting. I kept my phone close, checking for any updates from Tom or the police. Emily tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she'd startle awake, her breath catching in her throat. I stayed awake, watching over her, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger towards Richard, a deep-seated pity for Emily, and a confusing resurgence of the love I thought was lost. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the curtains, my phone buzzed. It was Tom. "Mark, I've found something. Richard has a history of violence, but he's covered his tracks well. There's a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend, but it was dropped. He's got friends in high places, but there might be a way to leverage this." Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with the fear of what might come next. "Thanks, Tom. Keep digging. We need everything we can get." Emily stirred, her eyes meeting mine, searching for hope. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice small. "He's found something. It's not much, but it's a start. We're not alone in this, Emily. We'll fight back." She nodded, her expression a mix of relief and lingering fear. "I just want this to be over," she murmured. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It will be. We'll make sure of it." The day stretched ahead, each hour filled with the tension of waiting, of planning, of hoping that Tom's findings would give us the leverage we needed. But beneath it all, the question lingered. Would the phone rang, shattering the fragile calm of our hotel room. I glanced at Emily, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She nodded, giving me the silent permission to answer. It was Tom, his voice urgent, cutting through the static of the line. "Mark, I've found something big. Richard has a history of violence and there's evidence of financial misconduct. We can use this," Tom said, his words a lifeline in the storm. We were weathering. Before I could respond, a shadow fell across the room. The door burst open with a force that made both Emily and me jump. There stood Richard, his presence filling the room with menace. His eyes, dark and cold, locked onto Emily, who instinctively moved behind me. "You think you can take her from me? She's mine." Richard's voice was a growl, his fists clenched at his sides. I stood my ground, adrenaline surging through me. "She's not yours, Richard. She's free to leave, and she's chosen to do so." The tension in the room was palpable, like the air before a thunderstorm. Richard lunged at me, his movements fueled by rage and desperation. I reacted on instinct, years of suppressed anger and the need to protect Emily giving me the strength to push back. We grappled, the room echoing with the sounds of our struggle. Emily screamed, her voice piercing through the chaos. "Stop, please. Stop!" But Richard was relentless, his blows aimed with precision, yet I managed to dodge and counter. In a moment of clarity, I saw an opening and used his momentum against him, sending him sprawling onto the floor. I pinned him down, my breath heavy, my heart pounding in my chest. The police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Emily had managed to call them in the midst of the scuffle. Officers burst into the room, their guns drawn, assessing the situation in a heartbeat. They pulled me off Richard, handcuffing him as he shouted threats and obscenities. "He's got a history of violence," I told the officers, my voice steadier than I felt. "And there's evidence of financial misconduct. My friend Tom, he's got it, all." One of the officers nodded, his expression grim. "We'll take it from here. You've done well, sir." As they led Richard away, his eyes met mine, filled with a promise of retribution. But the immediate threat was neutralized, and for now, that was enough. Emily collapsed into my arms, her body trembling with relief and exhaustion. "Thank you, Mark. I didn't know what he was capable of." I held her, feeling the warmth of her body against mine, the familiarity of her presence stirring old emotions. "It's over, Emily. He can't hurt you anymore." The officers took our statements, and as they left, the room felt suddenly too quiet, the adrenaline fading, leaving a hollow emptiness in its wake. Emily and I sat on the bed, the space between us charged with unspoken words. "I still love you, Mark," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. "Despite everything I do." I looked at her, seeing not just the woman who had left me, but the one who had come back, battered but unbroken. I think I still love you too, Emily. But we've got a lot to work through." The realization was like a balm to my wounded heart. We had been through a storm, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could rebuild from the wreckage. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in days it held a glimmer of hope. Richard would face justice, his connections no longer a shield but a noose around his neck. And as for Emily and me, the road ahead was long, filled with the need for forgiveness, understanding, and healing. But we were together, and that was a start. A start to reclaiming our lives, our love, from the shadows of betrayal and violence. The legal battle against Richard was a grueling marathon, stretching over months with each court appearance feeling like a step through quicksand. The charges were severe: assault, financial fraud, and a list of other counts that painted a picture of a man who had long evaded the consequences of his actions. But justice, slow as it was, began to turn its wheels. Evidence from Tom's investigation, coupled with Emily's testimony, painted a damning portrait of Richard's character. As the trial progressed, Emily and I found ourselves in a strange limbo. Our relationship, once shattered by her departure, was now being pieced back together, not with the same innocence of before, but with a new, cautious respect. We attended therapy sessions together, learning to navigate the minefield of trust and betrayal. It wasn't easy. Every session felt like peeling back layers of pain, but it was necessary. Mark's work, which had been a mere distraction during the darkest times, now became his refuge again. He threw himself into projects with a renewed vigor, his passion for his work rekindled by the ordeal. Emily, on the other hand, found a new job, one that allowed her to start afresh, away from the shadows of her past life with Richard. It was a small boutique where she could immerse herself in creativity, something she had long missed. One evening, as we sat in our home, now filled with new memories rather than the ghosts of our past, Emily turned to me, her eyes still healing from the bruises, held a depth of emotion I hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm sorry for everything, Mark. Can we start over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked into her eyes, seeing not just the woman who had left, but the one who had returned, changed but still the essence of the Emily I had loved. "Yes, let's start over," I replied, my voice firm with resolve. We embraced, the warmth of her body against mine, a silent promise to face whatever came next together. The trial concluded with Richard being found guilty on multiple counts. The sentence was harsh, reflecting not just the crimes against Emily, but also the long trail of manipulation and abuse he had left behind. As the gavel fell, a weight lifted from our shoulders, not just the burden of justice, but the heavy cloak of fear and uncertainty. In the aftermath, Emily and I took steps to rebuild our lives. We moved to a new house, one without the echoes of our past, and began to fill it with laughter, with new memories. Our relationship was different now, tempered by the fire we had walked through. We learned to communicate, to share our fears, and hopes to rebuild trust not just in each other but in ourselves. The question of whether our love story would have a happy ending or face more challenges lingered in the air. Life, after all, is unpredictable, filled with its own set of trials and tribulations. But as we sat together watching the sunset from our new porch, I felt a sense of peace. We had faced the storm, and while the skies might not always be clear, we knew we could weather whatever came our way, together. Emily squeezed my hand, her touch a reminder of our journey. "No matter what happens, Mark, we've got each other," she said, her voice steady. I nodded, looking at her, feeling the strength of our bond, forged in the fires of adversity. Yes, we do, and that's all that matters. The future was uncertain, but for now, in this moment, we were together, and that was enough. Our love story, marked by pain and redemption, was ongoing, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of forgiveness and love to heal even the deepest wounds. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.